Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fortis Impact Talk. On this week's show, we had a very important discussion with Gideon Joubert. He's one of the driving forces behind Gun Owners South Africa. And in this interview, it profoundly stood out how important it is to fight the government against disarming the public. If you relinquish your right to bear arms, you relinquish your right to freedom.
And it's a hard conversation to have.
Not everybody can just get on a plane and leave. People just think proactive, just not reactive.
All right, tonight I would like to welcome Gideon Joubert. Gideon, welcome to the Fortis Impact Talk.
Thank you very, very much, Wynand, for inviting me, for having me on, and giving me a chance to shoot the breeze with you on this Wednesday night, which is pretty darn cold, actually.
Yeah. Oh, it's like I said earlier, it just soaks into your bones and doesn't let go.
No, it's in there, definitely.
So, Gideon, the first question I would like to ask, and this comes straight from Dion at Fortis. He would like to know where's your mustache?
Oh, okay, right. So apparently you're not a real pilot if you don't have hair above your lips. So I never went to the Air Force and I never subscribed to the Speedkop school of thought. So we can tell Dion that if he's willing to, we can make some sort of offline bet and arrangement. But if he's willing to come to the party with certain goods and services, then I might consider going to the immense effort of cultivating said moustache. And I think, yeah, that would be appropriate.
Yeah, that's it. Well,
I don't have the patience to do it, but you're beardless, so I mean.
Yeah, and this is also the first time on camera that I'm completely beardless. I look weird. When you look in the mirror and you go, wait, that's me. Gideon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I've been making trouble on the internet for about 6 years now with my blog and with my writing about gun rights, and which has weirdly transitioned into a civil rights angle with the lockdown. But I mean, it's not that weird, really. I mean, gun rights are civil rights are gun rights. It's not even two sides of the same coin. It's the same thing. And I'm involved with Gun Owners SA, and I used to fly airplanes for a living. I might still, but who knows? And I've been trying to get good information out to normal people who don't understand the importance of defending themselves and how to defend themselves and how can they legally obtain a firearm and a firearm license, what are their rights, what should they be worried about, all this sort of stuff. So that's who I am and what I do in a nutshell, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. So this is. It sounds like it's a passion that started for you at some point. How did it start to develop for you?
It started when I got my first firearm, which was a Section 13 self-defense license for Heckler & Koch USP, and it kind of took off when I realized there's a lot more to gun ownership than just having the license, having the gun. That's just outside from the training stuff. I mean, Dion and you and the Fortis guys, you lot all know about training, combatives, the importance of skills development and mindset development outside just, the physical tool. But then there's the element of firearm rights and the politics attached to it and the social side to the argument and the civil rights part of it and why that's important. I kind of got sucked in there, and in a big way, because for some reason it's something that just interested me immensely. And a fire was lit and stuff happened, and now I'm here on this interview with you and we're talking about it. And actually today I managed to register Fortis as a PTY Limited. It is now a registered company. So the lockdown has reprioritized a lot of things in my life, and I'm decided to take this stuff a lot more seriously than before in order to turn it into actual full-blown company with regards to the media we put out, with regards to how we run it. I'm still going to swear and irritate people and piss them off. That's not going to change, but we just have a PTY Limited behind, me being offensive now. So there's that.
Yeah. That's important. Controversy, I think, around this topic is important because once you were saying it now, and it just the thought just popped into my head immediately. And let me ask you this question then: why is there so much confusion regarding owning a firearm?
I wish I could give you one answer, one clean single line answer. If I had to, if I was going to be an arsehole, I'd tell you ignorance. But it cuts a bit deeper than that. So we have to ask questions like, why are people ignorant? Where there's misinformation, so you get the Hollywood misinformation, which is mostly innocent. It's stuff people see about guns in movies. Then there's the gun-free South Africa media misinformation, where people are told lies like they're 4 times as likely to be killed with their own gun as effectively using it in self-defense, or that it's impossible to get a firearm license for self-defense. That's an old myth which is pervasive still to this day, and how difficult it is. And it puts, let's be honest, the South African licensing process isn't particularly straightforward. It isn't particularly easy. You have to have a lot of patience, but it's far from being impossible. But people generally, I find that I talk to have the strong impression that it's so difficult as to be nearly impossible, and then they just don't explore it any further. And I fell into that same pitfall before I got my first firearm license. I believed this stuff too, because that's what you read, that's what you hear. With the mainstream media becoming less important in the sense of how heavy they can hit these days, because there are so many more alternative sources out there. I don't call it the alt media, I like calling it the guerrilla media, because we fight. We're not just an alternative. We're in the hills hurling rocks at the establishment, right? The guerrilla media is becoming a lot bigger and a lot more loud and vocal, and people subscribe to the stuff that we say, because the mainstream media has been exposed so often as half-truths, pushing an agenda, all this sort of stuff. That's my very long-winded explanation about why I think, that kind of ignorance and misinformation exists, and this misimpression exists. I don't know. From your side and your experience, how have you found it?
It's talking to different people. I think firearm owners, they've gone through the process. They know exactly what they needed to do, and they understood the importance of it. Yeah. So I feel that the people who are confused by this haven't made up their minds yet if they want to take responsibility for their own lives.
That's actually a very good point, because taking responsibility for your own life is a scary concept. You have to acknowledge that there's something out there that threatens it, and actively threatens it enough for you to have to take, quite a serious step in mitigating against that risk, which is owning and carrying a firearm on a daily basis. And I think a lot of people, and this is unfortunately a human failing, and you can see it in the business world as well, how people would just refuse to acknowledge that the company they work for is in trouble, or that their business is going under, or that there's an existential threat to their current way of life that manifests in some way or other. And it's the same with owning a gun. It's like people want to live in a la-la land where they, as long as they don't have to confront the reality that really bad things can happen to them, a firearm and owning one and carrying one represents that reality that something bad can happen. That's actually a very valid and good point on it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it's a concerning thing for me, because in that regard, if you face the reality of the threat that you're up against, then everyone should have a firearm.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, what I was about to say is that you've got a crippled mindset, really, in the sense that even if you have a gun, are you going to have the correct fighting spirit? Are you going to have the mental fortitude, the desire to actually deploy it it really boils down to, can you fight? If you're put in a position, even if you didn't have a gun, can you fight? Do you have the mindset to fight if you're threatened?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think most people try and avoid that topic, or that conversations they have to have with themselves to get to that point, because I think, crime is so prominent that what's the point? It's going to happen anyway, right?
Exactly. It's gonna happen anyway, and it's uncivilized to fight, right? We like to see ourselves as civilized human beings, but if you if you read old school like Victorian era novels like Sherlock Holmes, so they're fictional characters, but Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson were completely fictional, but they were gentlemen in the Victorian era. But both of them knew how to fight. And in fact, in the books, they're quite thuggish. And there's more than one instance where Watson intended to assault a villain with a chair that he grabbed in a room. So, I mean, this is a respectable doctor with a practice who's about to go and take someone out with a piece of furniture because that's what he had on hand.
Yes.
And, I think there's this myth that knowing how to fight, knowing how to defend yourself is thuggish or uncivilized, and that people, like decent people don't want to know how to do it, which is very detrimental to decent people when bad, violent criminals who are hardened, who have lived this life of crime, eventually rock up in your house one day and, you need to respond. Having ADT on the panic button is great. Having a cop on the phone, well, good luck in modern SA getting through on 10111. You're on your own. You're right.
Yeah, I reckon on that point, you'll have better response if you put it on the WhatsApp group in your community. You'll have a much better response. But going back on that point now, I'm sitting here thinking now that the fact that the reluctance to fight, it's sort of kicking against your own male instinct or survival instinct. So how come we've been so lulled into getting comfortable with being threatened and not doing anything about it?
It's a weird thing, and I mean, I find myself fighting against this instinctiveness to be overly polite and apologetic in a public space. It's almost a case of, well, no, you have to be, when someone enters your immediate personal space, whether or not they're there to ask for the time or they want to bum a cigarette off you because you're out in public, you have to put down a hard sort of zone and say, listen, don't come into my space. Like, stay where you are. What do you want? And we're almost not brought up to react like that and to treat other people. If you're brought up middle class in SA or higher, then you are told, no, you need to be polite to people. You have to treat them with respect. Whereas all you're doing, if someone's got bad intent, is you're allowing them to get into your space to do stuff to you that you don't want because you've given them an opening. And this is where you get really good books like Left of Bang that I recommend people read, because it gives you insight into how to effectively do not criminal profiling, but what they call combat profiling. But it's profiling is to sort of ascertain someone's intent, not based on how they look, but based on what they're doing. And then you can make a judgment call on that. And the thing is, kids who grow up in poorer, rougher areas, that grow up poorer and rougher than most, they're exposed to this kind of stuff early on, and they have a very well-developed sort of warning system in their limbic system, really. They gut, what we refer to colloquially as gut feel. So they know a lot sooner than the average person who had a softer upbringing when something's not okay, and why it's not okay, and how to spot a threat out in the streets or in the mean streets. And let's be honest, if you live in South Africa, all the streets are mean streets here. There's no such thing as a good neighborhood anymore, really, because criminals can find you wherever you are. I mean, that's evident from what we see in the news.
Yeah, that's interesting. This may be a little bit off topic, but what do you think the crime reflected in the news? Because we spoke about it now being propaganda and kind of being controlled. In that sense, how do you see that?
I see a lot of crime that I'm aware of, and a lot of violent crime that I'm aware of that is happening, just not get reported in the media at all. unless someone is shot dead or there's a really big thing that's proper homicide or multiple homicides happening or stuff like that, that gets into the news. Armed robbery, home invasions, assault GBH. There's a lot of stuff just in my area that's happening right now that I know of. I know the people it's happened to. Doesn't get into the news, doesn't get reported. People are under this misimpression that contact crime has just stopped existing because of the lockdown. Meanwhile, it's carrying on, situation normal. Like, people are still getting murdered, they're still getting raped. Business robberies are definitely up. House robberies are going up. It's happening. I mean, in the rural areas where Fortis, you guys used to operate a lot of like agriculture, rural farm related sort of crime stuff. Stock theft is through the roof. There's all sorts of things happening, but it's not being, people aren't being made aware of it. People have a very strong misimpression about what the genuine situation on the ground is right now.
And what, in your opinion, would that be?
I think it's, as far as I can tell, business as usual. Violent crime, confrontational crime. The lockdown hasn't really stopped it. It's still carrying on, like this, and it's going to get worse. The economic drivers of violent interpersonal crime have all been exacerbated by the fact that we stopped the economy for 2 months. It's not a matter of when we open it up. As before we open up, it is gonna escalate. And people need to understand this, that we are not going back into situation normal. We're going back into a much worse place when it comes to that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And it's evident. I mean, you just look around you. I mean, ignore the media. I think people's perception sort of dictates occurring events, and that's what it seems like to me. It's just gonna, nothing is ever gonna be the same. Let's just say that. All right, Gideon, I'm getting back to the gun related stuff. Now, just to get some misconceptions out of the way, I'd like to ask you to give us sort of a guide on how to attain your firearm, how to go through the licensing process. What is the best way to go about this?
Well, there are numerous ways. I'm not going to tell you that my way is necessarily the best way. It's just the way I've figured out how it works, and I can condense it a little bit because otherwise you and I will be here all night.
Yeah.
So I did I did write a little guide. It's a very short little guide that I wrote that I'll send you the link to.
Okay, right.
But to summarize it, so if you got nothing, the first thing you're going to do is you need to get a competency certificate. To get a competency certificate, the one that the police issues you, you need to go to find an accredited firearm training institution, and you need to go through the entire sort of process there, which includes you get study material, you do a open book test, then a closed book test, then a practical demonstration of skill. Sort of, you have to shoot a target at a set range with the firearm you're trying to get. There's a legal module attached to it, so you do those. Once you've successfully completed the competency training, you get something called a training certificate. You then take these training certificates, you fill in the appropriate SAP form that you get from the police, or you download it from their website. Then you apply for your competency certificate. That's going to take you 3 months to get. So while that's going on, you can go and do the following. You can go pick a firearm you want. So if you haven't tried them out already, go try them out, find one you want, buy it. Get the license application form for that firearm from the dealership, fill that thing in so long. Go buy a safe for that gun, drill it into your wall or into your floor as according to the SABS specifications with the roll bolts. So install your safe, have your safe installed. Then go get a motivation done. Either use a company like Motivus or write it yourself, or get help from friends or colleagues, or some guys of us in the industry who can help you with templates. Get your motivation for that firearm written up so long with your annexures. Then as soon as your competency certificate's approved and you get the printout or the card, I believe they issue cards again these days, you go to the police station with your entire motivation and your license application, then you attach a copy of your competency certificate, and then you the one the cops issued or the competency card, and then you apply for your firearm license. That's going to take you another like 3 months minimum, and then maybe sooner. Sometimes I've heard of guys getting licenses in 2 weeks, so it can happen. I once got a firearm license, a dedicated sport license for a pistol in 2 weeks, so it can happen. Don't bargain on it, but it can. But long story short, that's your most straightforward path in doing it. So it requires a little bit of planning, a little bit of dedication, but that's the price you pay for owning a firearm in SA, and it's worth doing. It's so worth doing.
Excellent. That's fantastic. So if anybody needed any advice, there it is. Gideon, you're also one of the how can I say, driving forces behind GOSA. Is that?
I am on the board of directors. I'm one of many people involved with Gun Owners SA.
And how did that come about?
I think by accident. I was a pain in the ass. I got involved in the whole fight, and I think they wanted volunteers one day, and I stuck my hand up, and then I got sucked into this maelstrom, and now here we are, and I ended up on the board. But I'm not someone who goes, oh, you should join GOSA and only GOSA. And Paul, the actual chairman, also said this, like, just pick any organization. If you don't like GOSA, if you don't like what we do, if you don't like the personalities behind it, just pick an organization that you do like, but join something. Just join an organization that fights for, the right for ordinary people to keep and bear arms in SA. Get involved in the fight in any way you can. Like, it doesn't matter which label or brand or bunch of people you pick, but just do something at least. And I think that's an important message people need to hear, is it doesn't, of course I'm going to tell you join GOSA, but if you don't want to, that's cool, but just join somebody, anybody at all.
Yeah. But Gideon, one thing I need to clarify is why is it necessary that an organization like GOSA exists?
The very simple reason is that guns have only two enemies, and the one's rust and the other one's politicians. And there has, unfortunately, for I think as long as South Africa has existed, if you go way back to like 1876, the Cape Colony brought out a set of legislation known as the Peace Preservation Act of 1876, or was it 1878? I can't remember, but I mean that's minutiae now. Like, we don't have to go in depth. And the sole purpose of this act was to disarm the black population in the Cape Colony to make the rest of the white population feel safe. Not actually make them physically safe, but to make them feel safe. It was security theatre, much like the Firearms Control Act was. And why this was significant is most of the black tribesmen and labourers were paid for the work they did, not necessarily in money, but a lot of them got paid in rifles and ammunition and black powder and that sort of stuff. And a lot of, the more educated and literate black citizens, if you can call them that, or residents of the Cape Colony, took huge issue with this. And they wrote letters to the Cape Argus to protest it, much like we're still doing today, is getting into the media with our thoughts. And the one was called John Tengu Jabavu. He was 19 years old when he started writing letters, and he said, this is an absolutely ridiculous attempt at civilian disarmament based on nothing, that's just florally worded, like the Firearms Control Act. And it led to one of the first actual wars about civilian disarmament called the Basotho Gun War, or the War of the Gun, 1880 to 1881, where the Cape Colony sent a whole army essentially to Basotholand to go and forcibly disarm the Basotho. That didn't work out for them so well. They got their asses kicked horrendously, went back to the Cape Colony with their tails between their legs, and then they kind of negotiated a settlement, and the Basotho got to keep their guns. But long story short, that was the start of it, and things haven't really changed since then. Under British administration, The old Boer republics were they tried disarming them, but that didn't quite work. Then we had the Arms and Ammunition Act, which you could, strictly speaking, if you were a non-white person, get a license, but you didn't, because that's just not how the system worked.
Yeah.
And then now we've got the Farms Control Act of 2000, which was the next step on. So the South African government, successive South African governments, from the days before the union even existed, were obsessed with gun control, obsessed with keeping guns out of the hand of civilians, so that the government and its organs of state had the sole monopoly on armed force. That's essentially the bare bones crux of the matter, is they wanted the guns, and they don't really like citizens having it, because if you look at what happens when free, responsible citizens have guns, you get things like the American Revolution. You get other aspects where, if you push people into a corner and you behave tyrannically and you try and take their rights from them without due process, and you enact some form of tyranny and autocracy, civilians can go, you know what, we're done taking this. We're going to start shooting the people that are oppressing us now. And governments just don't like that. They don't like having to live with that sword hanging over their heads, that they better behave and they have to obey the law and not oppress people. And unfortunately, it's no different in South Africa than anywhere else.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So relinquishing your firearm sort of, that makes you vulnerable for a dictatorship.
Well, absolutely, because every dictatorship in history had to systematically disarm its populace first. The Germans in the Third Reich didn't do it overtly. They had a system of gun registration in place already, thanks to the Weimar Republic, because they were thinking, oh no, we are doing good gun control. But what they could do, thanks to this registry, is they found Jews, they found other people classified as enemies of the state or undesirables, and they forcibly disarmed them. They made it incredibly easy for Nazi Party loyalists to get guns, and as many guns as they wanted.
Yeah.
But for parts of society that they disapproved of, they disarmed them. Stalin and Lenin and the communists in Russia did the same thing they did it in broad strokes to Russians all over the place, in the sense of they disarmed the citizenry in order to be able to show their centralized power. The Chinese did the same thing. It's the same that's happened in Venezuela. They banned civilian ownerships of guns, and then the government started murdering people. That's the most recent example.
Yeah.
It's a common theme wherever there's dictatorship, wherever there's authoritarianism and tyranny. There was some form of civilian disarmament that happened right before things got really bad.
What is the mentality behind a government to want to do something like that to other people? Like, take away their freedom to defend themselves. I mean, let's take the Africa example for the Basutus. Right? They were kind of a small tribe, if I understand correctly. So they needed the arms to defend themselves against other tribes and to defend themselves against the wildlife.
Yeah. And to
So now
hunt and all these sorts of things. Yeah.
Exactly. So now you're disarming them. You take away their freedom. And is this not what our government is currently? Is that not what they want to do?
That's exactly what they're doing. And I think if we had to investigate the deeper motives behind this, it's a theme that runs strongly through all sorts of Marxist doctrine. Is you're looking at a strong central concentration or centralization of all power and autonomy and administration. So everything is centrally planned in the economy. So you've got a centralized police service or police force. Rather, you've got a centralized armed force or security apparatus. You've got centralized planning on all aspects of the economy. And for this stuff to work, you need to be able to actively interfere in people's personal lives. But the moment you give them the ability to resist it, physically resist it, it gives you problems. Because now, all of a sudden, you can't implement your grand plan, whether it's called the National Democratic Revolution, or in the Chinese case, the Great Leap Forward, or in Lenin's case, war communism, or in Stalin's case, these policies of collectivism. If you meet armed resistance, that's a massive stumbling block on your path to your communist utopia. That's if you're a true believer. If you're not a true believer and you're just a corrupt kleptocrat who likes stealing and looting, it's inconvenient if people get too pissed off at you stealing their pensions and taking their houses and their property and just doing whatever you want. If they can come up and say, well, you know what? No, we're not going to let you just do what you want, and we've got the means and ability to resist you doing what you want, then that's still a problem for you. And I think one mustn't forget that, especially in the South African sense, politicians are incredibly self-serving creatures. They only look out for their own immediate interests and the interests of those connected to them. They've got no long-term plan. They don't care if the entire place burns down, as long as today, tomorrow, and in the immediate future, they benefit from it somehow. And obviously, armed civilians, not really their friend when it comes to this sort of thing.
Okay, let's take it from a perspective of a legal aspect, and then from a actual practical aspect. How quickly can the government just say, all right, that's it, we're taking away all the guns?
So from a legislative point of view, I think they pretty much can. But it's a big but. Practically, how do you disarm 3 million people? Even better, how are you going to go to a guy like Goodwill Zwelithini, who's got millions of Zulu warriors who swore fealty to him, and say to him, listen, King Goodwill, we're going to come take your subjects we're going to come take their weapons, many of which are unlicensed or licensed or whatever, and this is just the way it's going to go. I mean, you might be able to do it to some individuals to make an example of them, but when it comes to a strong collective society that stands together against sort of perceived adversity or genuine, there's no way.
History repeats itself.
There's no way that 80,000 policemen are going to go to 4 million Zulus and take their guns. I mean, good luck. I mean, if those who are about to die, we salute you, because that's exactly what's going to happen. It'll be the bloody Hunger Games. So there's a lot that they can do legislatively that they can make illegal. And, the mild-mannered suburbanites will be targeted because, we don't really necessarily feel as strongly as someone like a Zulu living in the Midlands with his king might feel with it. But it's definitely not something that's particularly practical. And I don't know if, when it comes to the ANC, they say, you mustn't blame on malice that which you can attribute to incompetence. The ANC is incredibly incompetent. I mean, let's not make the mistake in assuming they're not horrendously stupid, but they're also horrendously malicious at the same time. And there is not a bad idea that they've met that they didn't like. So we mustn't get too comfortable thinking that just because something's terrible and stupid that they won't try it. Because they will, and they have done this over and over and over.
Yeah. And that's why you guys are saying, join any group. You don't have to join this group. You can join any group. Just get on the wagon.
Exactly. Get on the wagon, make your voice heard, stand and fight. Whatever slogan you like, we'll put it on a bumper sticker for you. But, just do something.
But personally, how do you feel about gun ownership and the fact that the government is actively trying to disown us on a personal level? What does that mean to you?
It used to upset me a lot more. It used to be something that made me almost lie awake at night and make me stressed and worried. And then you realize it's something that they've always been trying to do.
Yeah, like you said, with the history background, yes.
And that they will never stop doing. So this is not a fight you can win, but it's a fight that you can not lose. And that's the thing we want to do is you have to fight to win. You always have to fight to win. But it's not as simple as that. The fact is, you have to realize the fight's perpetual. It's always going to be bloody. But the moment you stop fighting, that's the moment you lose. So you can never stop fighting. Yeah.
Excellent answer. That's an excellent answer. Gideon, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to the Fortis Impact Talk. It's been wonderful chatting to you and giving us some really good insight into what's actually happening in the government and the fight against firearm ownership. I
Thank
think
you, Wynand.
it's a fantastic thing that you guys are doing. I see there's a lot of followers, and it's something that people should definitely buy into because our
Well,
freedom is at stake.
our freedom is at stake, and we can't go down without a fight, and we can't afford to lose. So we have to give it our all, and we have to pour our energy and our passion into it, and we have to give people a voice. So, but thank you for allowing me the chance to have this talk with you and tell people what I think they should do. Whether or not they will, it's up to them. But still,
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Gideon. I really appreciate it.
thank you, Wynand.
Cool, man.
Appreciate it as well. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.